Hello, my name is Remaz Abdelgader. I just recently graduated from George Mason University, where I studied international conflict analysis and resolution and minored in immigration studies. Since graduating, I became a political outreach coordinator for this organization called Emerge USA. It's a civic engagement Muslim organization that works with the Muslim community in Virginia and the other states to get them registered to go and vote, to host civic engagement trainings on the weekends, and to essentially increase political literacy amongst the community. And since then, I've also gone on to intern on Capitol Hill with Congressman Andre Carson of Indianapolis, Indiana, who is one of two Muslim congressional members working on the Hill. Well, during the campaign season, I went on to speak to various supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders on how they can show solidarity with the Muslim community. And I also began to organize with other faith-based organizations, predominantly the Jewish community, through this initiative called a Rabbi Imam Summit of Greater Washington. So there are Jews and Muslims who work together towards curbing anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. But more recently, their focus has been on Islamophobia. So essentially, we did a lot of things together. We had conferences where people came from the community. These are professionals, these are attorneys, these are activists, these are scholars and authors and professors who truly want to see a change in the political climate and want to protect their Muslim brothers and sisters. One thing that we did was this banner, and it was this really large banner, and it said, "Stand with your Muslim neighbors." So various synagogues in the Greater Washington area hung that from their synagogues, and of course in mosques and churches. So that's one of the things that I worked with. It's that faith-based organizing, but then also the Bernie Sanders campaign. I volunteered for them, so I did a lot of phone banking for Senator Bernie Sanders, trying to just get him out there, and also going to various rallies, and speaking to some of his supporters there, and I was given the opportunity by his DC campaign to go out and speak in Maryland with about 300 people that really wanted to know how they could help protect Muslim Americans during the election, but most importantly afterwards, regardless of what the results going to be. So that's kind of the work that I did during election time, and also just speaking amongst other Muslim Americans and speaking within my community, and just trying to encourage people to begin to see that we can no longer think ourselves as second-class citizens. We need to emerge from that stigma. We need to emerge from that regard and that category, and consider ourselves, amongst those who matter in society, and those that truly belong into the society, those that are part of the American fabric, and those that contribute greatly to the society. So therefore, we should be active, and therefore we should organize amongst ourselves and outside of our communities, and show that our rights do matter in this nation, and that we're going to speak and guarantee that as citizens we have a say, because the Muslim story in America is not just one of an immigrant status. Some of the slaves that came here, 1/3 of the slaves were actually Muslim. This is not a story that's said, and 1/3 of the Muslim population in America are African Americans. There's that history there, and then you also have some of your earlier migrants to New York in the 40s and then in the early 60s that came from predominantly Muslim nations, but they are our doctors, our engineers, our teachers, our coaches. They are part of this society, and I think that's the narrative that's emerging amongst the community collectively, and that's what people are doing now. They're organizing on various levels, and are trying their best to make sure that, you know, they're at the forefront of these conversations and they're no longer being pushed aside. Yeah, I mean, this is a personal observation, and I have many friends that, of course, share this perspective. But essentially, you know, when you have, like, my family, we came to America in 2002. So that was a year after 9/11. Of course, you know, you have your disparities, and you have, you know, the stigmas and the stereotypes about Muslim Americans post the 9/11 era. But essentially, you know, as a young little girl, in the beginning, you don't tend to notice it, especially since I'm from Washington D.C. You know, this is in Northern Virginia. That's one of the most diverse areas, diversity in thought, and, you know, actual respective physical diversity. Mm-hmm. So you know, I think for a while we took it for granted. You know, of course, you have your instances of, you know, highly charged Islamophobic incidents, and you have your micro and macro forms of aggression towards Muslims. And, you know, especially for me, since I am a Black Muslim woman, there's the intersectionality of so many different types of stereotypes and discriminations that makes it even more complex and complicated to understand. But it's emerging from that thought process that, hey, I came from this war-torn country, I came from this developing nation to seek freedom, to seek safety, and, you know, you exist in this society, and there's no longer, you know, bombardments from, I don't know, what it might be, that was a threat in your nation. You live and exist in this umbrella of safety, security, a true democracy, where you don't really think that you have to protect and defend your identity and your basic human right to exist as now a citizen. Mm-hmm. But since this election was very highly charged. There was rhetoric, anti-Muslim rhetoric, considering us amongst those who belong and derive from an inherently violent faith, and ones that you know, want to take over the West, or whatever rhetoric that was out there. And it doesn't only skew people's perspectives, like other citizens of America, but essentially this can be policy. You know, mm-hmm. You know, many of those running amongst the GOP were those who used this rhetoric, anti-Muslim, highly Islamophobic, and now we have Donald Trump presidency. And what does that mean for the Muslim community? Mm-hmm. You know, temporary bans, monitoring of Muslims, you know, IDing all Muslims. And this is the kind of rhetoric. So Muslims now can no longer afford to consider themselves, you know, ones that can belong to the society without talking about these issues, mm-hmm. about their threats, about you know, what this means to them, their children, and their identity in this nation. So and it's that emergence again from that perspective of second-class citizenship, and saying, hey, hold up, I am a citizen. I belong in this nation just as much as you do. I have an immigrant past, and I have a narrative that speaks of me coming from a different country to seek refuge and safety, but so do you. Do you mm-hmm. remember when your family migrated to America from Italy or Ireland, or, you know, X, Y, and Z? We all have the same narrative. So instead of wanting to divide us based upon these perspectives on what our identity is, how about we unify amongst one another and see each other and regard one another? That's what's happening now, and people are doing that in different ways. You have your grassroots activism. You have those whom are protesting, those whom are, you know, making sure that people understand what their identity is about. You interact with that human being. It's so difficult for you to deny that humanity, and it gets for you to, again, to, you know, practice that self-reflexivity of you know, understanding that this human being matters and has fears and concerns and hopes and desires that matter just as much as yours does. So there's that grassroots activism. Mm-hmm. Then you have, like, those whom are, you know, beginning to say, hey, you know, we're one marginalized group, but there are many others that are marginalized. There are many others who've had a history of discrimination in this nation. How can we put together our efforts as one collective voice, because that's so much more stronger? Mm-hmm. And that's what I was referring to in the beginning of this video about the faith-based organizing. It's standing with the Jewish community, with the Christian community, and the Hispanic community, the African American community, the Latino community. It's getting together and unifying those voices and saying, hey, like, I think we should work together on these issues. And that's been really interesting to witness and to see what that's like. This past summer, I partook in something called Spread Hummus Not Hate. And Jews and Muslims, they went to synagogues, to universities, to mosques, across Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. And we ended Farragut Square, right near the White House, spreading hummus and singing peace, salam, shalom. You know, we are family, and it's just like, it's that unity, and people seeing like, wow, Jews and Muslims together. They weren't just talking about their unity as two groups, two different faith groups, but we were also addressing this political climate. You know, we were saying no to division. You know, saying no to this hate mongering, this fear mongering that's currently happening. And that was really awesome. And we ended it with this rally for peace at American University with Ambassador Akbar. And, you know, so wonderful to have the AU community come out and to speak about, you know, unity and not wanting for intolerance to become widespread against this nation, because intolerance, you know, breeds hate and fear only breeds violence, and the cycle just continues to occur. And there were different tables set up where various student groups at the university had people come out and sign their petition for protecting Muslim civil liberties and saying no to a ban or saying no to a national registry. So you have that kind of activism where you're either joining with various faith-based organizations and groups, marginalized groups, student groups. That's that second kind of level that exists. And then you have another one, and that's like your public commentators. Those are your intellectual minds. Those are your attorneys, your authors, your scholars, your professors who, you know, usually can decipher, you know, an article or a chapter and make it into 3 really important lines, and, you know, send that out to the community where people can read it and become inspired to continue to do this grassroots work. There's just so much, and I think something that's really amazing that happened with this election. Although we did elect Donald Trump as our president, I think that, like Bernie Sanders said, we're going to continue to fight and make sure that the equality remains, and we're gonna fight for justice and equality for all marginalized groups, whether it be women, you know, whether it be African Americans, Latinos, Muslims, whatever it is that we're gonna do, what it takes to keep him accountable. Because there's so many members that belong in that community in Congress that could still, you know, be those voice of reason and logic in a very difficult time. Something that is a testament to that is the election of Ilhan, and she is the first legislator, first Muslim American African woman with an immigrant background from Somalia, who's only 32 and is a senator of her state. And it's very remarkable to see a physical representation of what it's like to be Muslim, but to also be in such a position. And this is a woman who was elected in very high margins in her community and in that district of her state, with large numbers. She won that election. So people are beginning to see more than just the physical representation, but the content and the character and the message and the inspiration and the wanting to, you know, eradicate disparities and work towards inclusion and work towards, you know, guaranteeing access to some of the basic human rights that, you know, people need, like access to health care, education, you know, child care, etc. So it's really inspiring for the Muslim community. Yes, we may have, you know, Donald Trump as our president, but then we also have Ilhan, who is a Muslim legislator, you know, and we have so many people who are now becoming to be allies, and those stories that are emerging, like Ilhan's story. It's an incredible movement to witness, and it's an incredible movement to be a part of. And it's exciting, it's terrifying most days, but it's also really interesting to see what is the Muslim community going to do now, and what are the allies and surrounding that community going to do to foster their growth, but most importantly protect them during this difficult time. Yeah. We heard so many stories, and I think they're even more intensified when you have the intersectionality of so many different identities. Mine being a Muslim woman that's also of color.
Yeah.
You know, it's how do you protect yourself? I need for actual, you know, physical representation of what that safety is like. You know, perhaps it's increasing diversity in some of these places where legislation occurs. You know, it's making sure that we have a physical representation of those marginalized groups in those said places of power. And that's why I'm on the Hill right now. I'm interning for one of two Muslim congressional members who sits on the House's Intelligence Committee. So it's so interesting to see, you know, go to these briefings and these hearings about countering violent extremism and the Muslim community and seeing who those experts are that are speaking about us without us. It's saying, hey, I need to be in that seat. You know, I need to have that conversation. And, you know, in one of those hearings, I approached one of the he wasn't a congressional member, but he sits on like the board of like the committee. And he was just like, hey, what'd you think about that? And I was just like so shocked because, you know, you go to witness and see what's happening there. You don't go to say anything. And I shared with him and I was like, sir, you know, I will tell you something right away. I think CVE is a waste of money. I think what we need is community-based organizing. I think we need to increase mental health, access to mental health, opportunities for people to go and speak about their issues, because a lot of these problems and this domestic terrorism stems from mental health. If we look at all the instances in when people like gun violence, or not just gun violence, but instances of extremism, like it's called, these are people who come from very violent path. You know, they have very, very, really contested issues that they need to go and deal with. So then he was just like, wow, like, tell me more. And I was just like, you know, sir, I'll tell you something very personal. I was standing outside of my community college at one time, and someone wanted to hit me with their car and said, this isn't Iraq, and proceeded to call me the B word. And I was like, they don't know what my identity is. They don't know what I was doing a couple hours before that day. I was fundraising money for breast cancer and mastectomy operations in Africa. They don't know who I am. They don't know the community, the sense of community and the connection I have with the people at this institute. They don't know that. They don't know that energy. They don't know that power because they have not connected with me on a human level. So this is just a perception of my set identity. And I said, if it's so dangerous just existing and looking like that where people don't want me to be here, and they see me as a physical threat that they need to terminate with their car, you know, I don't think CVE policies are going to work here. And he was just like, you know, thank you so much for that insight. Here's my card. If you come up with anything, you know, shoot me an email. I'm just like that's interesting. But again, that only comes about with that physical representation in that position. Mm-hmm. And then it's so important. And now that's kind of my goal now, you know, is to find a position on the Hill where I can, you know, understand what the legislative process is like. And, you know, to be a part of that. And whether that be, it's a scary thought, but running for election at one point, running for that position where I can, you know, protect the civil liberties of not just Muslim Americans, but whatever next marginalized group there's going to be. I think there's a lot of hope, you know, people will begin to understand and those will bridge those narratives and people can actually be united. Like, I do see that as a possibility. Yeah. I believe Islam in itself is a faith of feminism, you know, and I think that is if you practice Islam in all its tenets and in all of its rules, you are a feminist, you know, and I think many people do not understand what that means because of culture, you know, like the culture in Afghanistan where girls can't go to school in a safe environment. You know, but if you look at the text of Islam and the stories of the women in Islam, I'm actually reading a book right now on the 12 women who have had remarkable changes within the Muslim faith that are not really taught about many times, right? And these are stories that read of superheroes, basically. These are women who, like Khadija, the Prophet's wife, she was an entrepreneur of her time. She was the entrepreneur of the city, of Arabia. And, you know, that power that comes with being a businesswoman that is highly sought after, a businesswoman that has so much power and capabilities, or Aisha, who was a scholar, you know, had tremendous knowledge and experiences in transcending that knowledge. So, you know, gives me great power when I can think about those stories of those women that have inspired so much of what Islam is. And drawing on their character, their resilience, their strength, their articulate and eloquent ways of speaking and transcending thoughts into writing and into poetry, and drawing from that inspiration and seeing myself as a Muslim feminist, one that has many identities, my being black and my being, of course, a woman and a Muslim, and that's where I can bring that feminist aspect from my faith and draw it into actual context of what my identity looks like in 2016 December, post election of Donald Trump as our president. It's drawing on those examples, like Sumaya was, and she was a fighter. She fought for equality and for the ability for other Muslim women and other Muslims to practice their faith. And it's just saying, like, wow, like, they're cool, and I just want to be just like them. So, when I hear stories of Islam being this oppressive, this timid, this pliable concept, or I guess women that belong to the Muslim faith are pliable, timid, oppressed, or what have you, in these words, I'm just like, what have you been reading? Like, where are you getting these stories? Have you read who Khadija was? Have you read who Sumaya was? Have you read who Aisha, who Fatima, who Soda is? Do you know of these women? Do you know of these narratives? Have you just picked up a book and read these stories? You will see why I speak the way I do. And I think Muslim women are doing this now more than ever. They're realizing their potential and their rights to knowledge and right to work and right to be public commentators in society. And there's this movement that did happen with this election. I think was mainly organized by women, like women from the magazine The Tempest or Muslim Girl, or Linda Sarsour, who's a huge icon for young Muslim women in the community. Looking at her, she's like this Brooklyn, Palestinian, fiery individual, and she shakes the ground wherever she walks. And she was part of the Justice League with these other, two other Latina and one African American woman who marched, up till Washington D.C. It took them a month to get here, and it's like drawing on these women that are the face of the movement. In one article, I think written by MuslimGirl.com, named me as one of 4 Muslim women to change American Muslim, or to be involved in American Muslim politics in this election. I'm just like, wow. Like, that's remarkable. But I think a lot of the strength, a lot of the energy that we can get to keep us resilient, to keep us moving forward, is from these stories. And honestly, that's what I've been doing with my free time. No more Netflix. It's reading on the stories of women that have paved and carved the faith that we have. Yeah, I think if I was to share something today with other women of color, and women of different identities that intersect in so many different ways, take forever to speak about them, because us as individuals, we're just so complex, and that's the beautiful thing about it. And my thing would be just to speak, speak even if your voice quivers, and that's been my motto. There's a lot of doubts, and there's a lot of fear about what our identities are, and there's a lot of fear about how tremendous the impact can be, or if we're gonna sound right, or if we're going to say it correctly or pronounce it, if we have accents, or if we look a little different, if our body is shaped a little differently. But it's saying, hey, I can no longer, be silent. I have to speak for what I believe in, and speak even if your voice quivers. Because right now is a time of activism. Right now is a time for you to speak. Right now is a time for you to show the world who you are. And don't worry about the syntax and the grammar. Just speak, because that is what people will identify with. And I think that is what people will be touched with. We have doubts. I always think back to this, the day where I asked Senator Bernie Sanders that question. Had I just been silent and just said, don't say anything, Remaz, don't say anything, just be quiet. It'll happen in a matter of minutes, but I can't, just thinking about the outcome it has had brings me goosebumps. Mm-hmm. It's just tremendous worldwide, impact, and that could have happened. had I not chosen to speak. And although my voice was shaky and I was trembling, with all that was happening, I am so glad that I found the strength within myself to speak. So if you are someone, wherever you are in the world, and you have a concept and you want to counteract and you want to speak about something that you find that is an injustice in your society, and you want to make sure that women get their equal opportunities and rights to practice and to do whatever it is that you want to do, your basic human rights, don't ever let anyone tell you no. And don't ever think that you don't sound right, and don't ever think that you're not the perfect person for it, because you are. Everyone is, and this is the time for you to speak what's in your heart and allow that truth to become power. And that's my message.